in one of the fastest growing economies on Earth, one that's driving this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure boom, over 60% of the heavy machinery market is completely unorganized.
Right, which is just, it's staggering when you really think about
It really is. I mean, think about that for a second, you guys listening.
it.
We are talking about modern airports, elevated highways, sprawling logistics parks being built from scratch, and a huge chunk of the equipment doing the actual physical heavy lifting comes from highly fragmented, local, completely informal
Yeah, it's
players.
a very striking contradiction.
Exactly. And today we are looking at the company trying to conquer that exact chaos. So welcome to you, our listener, as we embark on today's mission. We're unpacking a company that serves as a near-perfect proxy for India's immense industrial and infrastructure boom.
Right.
And that company is Action Construction Equipment, or ACE for short. And to do this, we've gathered this really deep stack of financial analysis, market share data, and strategic roadmaps detailing their operations, the whole competitive landscape they operate in, and, well, their financial health.
Which is fascinating all on its own.
Yeah, totally. So, okay, let's unpack this because we aren't just talking about a heavy machinery manufacturer today. We are looking at a crucial bottleneck and, a primary beneficiary in India's entire journey from raw metal to finished infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to understand ACE is to fundamentally understand the physical building blocks of the Indian economy at this exact moment in time.
Right.
They sit right in the middle of the value chain. And, what makes them such a compelling study for us today isn't just their market dominance, though. We will certainly get into those
There's
numbers.
definitely will.
Yeah, it's the pristine nature of their balance sheet because they're navigating this highly capital-intensive, deeply cyclical sector with a financial profile that is, well, it's exceedingly rare in heavy industry.
Right, but before we get into the financials, I really want to understand what this company actually looks like on the ground. Because when we say heavy machinery, I mean, that's a pretty broad brush, right?
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
So what exactly is rolling off their assembly lines on a daily basis?
So we can break their operations down into basically four core segments.
Yeah.
The flagship segment, which is really the absolute engine of the entire business, is cranes.
Right.
That segment alone accounts for roughly 79% of their total turnover.
Wow. Okay, so almost the whole thing.
Exactly, almost 80%. Then you have construction and material handling equipment making up about 8%.
Okay, 8%.
Right. Then agri-equipment, which is primarily tractors and harvesters, that sits at 7%. And finally, they have this emerging defense engineering segment, which is small but growing.
Okay, I want to stop you right at the cranes, though, because the numbers and the source material for this segment are just wild.
They really are.
I mean, the concentration is heavy, but so is the dominance. Let me just lay out what we're looking at for the listener, and you tell me how a single company achieves this.
Please do.
So, domestically, they hold a 63% market share in mobile cranes.
Right.
They hold over 60% in tower cranes. And this is the one that really caught my eye. Globally, they are the world's largest manufacturer of pick and carry cranes. They hold a 63% global share.
Yeah, it's an incredible statistic.
I mean, how does a company capture nearly 2/3 of the entire global market for a specific type of heavy machinery?
Well, to understand that, you really have to understand the environment the pick and carry crane was designed for in the first place.
Okay, walk me through that.
So in many developed markets, right, construction sites are highly organized. They're flat, they're spacious. You can set up a massive fixed tower crane or bring in a large static mobile crane, and it just sits there.
Right, like those huge ones you see in downtown city centers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Indian construction sites, historically, they've been chaotic. They're tightly packed, the terrain is rough, and they require equipment that can lift a heavy load and then physically drive it across uneven, crowded ground to another spot.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so the pick and carry crane is the ultimate workhorse for that specific environment. ACE didn't just build a machine, They perfected a machine uniquely suited to the realities of developing world infrastructure.
So they essentially built the perfect tool for their home turf and then realized that their home turf looks a lot like, well, many other developing nations.
Precisely.
But who is actually buying these things? Because I imagine the sales process isn't like, walking onto a used car lot.
Far from it, yeah.
Yeah.
The customer base is highly institutional.
Okay.
You're looking at major infrastructure EPCs, so that's engineering, procurement, and construction firms, along with large-scale real estate developers, mining conglomerates, and increasingly these dedicated rental companies.
And what does a typical transaction even look like with those guys?
Well, the order sizes vary wildly based on the machine you're talking about. You might have a smaller equipment order coming in at, say, 50 lakh,
Right?
all the way up to specialized heavy-duty cranes costing 10 crore per unit.
Wow. 10 crore for a single unit.
Yeah. And because these are complex, often highly customized pieces of engineering, the delivery cycle is typically anywhere from 3 to 9 months.
Oh, so they have to plan way ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The buyer is planning their equipment needs multiple quarters before the project even breaks ground. It's a very deliberate procurement cycle.
Now, the sources also break down where their revenue is coming from across different economic sectors, and it really reads like a heat map of India's current economic priorities, doesn't it?
It's a perfect mirror, yeah.
Because, look at this, 45% of their revenue is tied to manufacturing and logistics. Another 35% is straight infrastructure, so roads, bridges, rail.
Right.
13% is real estate, and 7% is agriculture. And when you add all those moving parts together, their total FY25 revenue hit 3,427 crore.
And, you know, the precise mix of that revenue is critical here.
Why is that?
Well, the cranes capture the high-velocity infrastructure spending. That's your 35%. But infrastructure can be volatile. Governments change, budgets shift. Right. So the material handling equipment, the forklifts and warehousing tech, that captures the steadier structural growth in logistics and e-commerce fulfillment.
Ah, right. People are always buying things online, even if a highway gets delayed.
Exactly. That's a different economic driver entirely.
Yeah.
And then the agricultural segment acts as a further counterbalance.
The tractors.
Yeah, tractors and harvesters. They tap into the rural economy, which is dictated by monsoon cycles and crop yields, right? So it operates on a completely different rhythm than urban real estate or national highway projects.
Okay, I see the logic there, and it sounds nice and balanced on paper. But let me push back a bit on this.
Sure.
I look at this revenue mix, and yes, it touches different sectors, but 79% of the turnover is still just cranes.
That's true.
So if they are so completely dominant in that one specific product line, aren't they just entirely dependent on it? Doesn't that make the agricultural tractors and the warehouse forklifts look a bit like window dressing?
Window dressing.
Yeah, like something you put in the annual report just to soothe investors who are terrified of concentration risk.
It's a very fair critique. At nearly 80% of turnover, cranes are undeniably the engine. If the crane market stalls, ACE will feel the pain deeply. There's no hiding from that.
Right.
But, dismissing the other segments as mere window dressing sort of overlooks the operational synergies they have.
Operational synergies like what?
Well, the material handling and agriculture segments, they utilize the exact same pan-India dealer networks.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they lean on similar supply chains for steel and hydraulics. They utilize the same core manufacturing competencies, so it allows them to sweat their physical assets and their distribution channels much, much harder.
Okay, that makes sense.
But to truly address your concern about overdependence on cranes, we have to look outward. We have to look at the sheer size of the total addressable market fueling that main engine.
Right, because if you own 60% of a pie, it really matters how fast that pie is actually growing. And the playground they're operating in is vast. For you listening, the total addressable market, or TAM, for ACE's core segments, and that is excluding the agricultural side completely, is estimated at $1.5 to $1.2 billion.
It's enormous.
And if you throw agriculture back in, it pushes the TAM to $1.5 to $1.8 billion.
And that market, it's being supercharged by structural catalysts that we simply haven't seen in previous economic cycles.
Yeah, the research highlights two behemoths driving this right now. First, you have the National Infrastructure Pipeline, the NIP, which is an allocation of 11.1 lakh crore over 10 years.
Huge.
And second is PM Gati Shakti at 3.5 lakh crore, which is heavily focused on logistics, multimodal connectivity, and rail integration.
Right.
I mean, when the government commits those kinds of numbers, it's essentially a multi-year guarantee of earth moving and heavy lifting, isn't it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those government programs provide the volume, sure.
Yeah.
But the real structural shift is happening in how that volume is actually serviced.
What do you mean?
Well, you mentioned earlier that organized domestic players only capture about 25 to 40% of total demand.
Yes, that stat was completely wild to me. It implies that 50 to 65% of the market is completely open territory.
Exactly. I mean, for an economy of India's size and maturity, having over half of your heavy equipment demand serviced by unorganized, fragmented local players or, gray market imports, it's a historical anomaly.
Right.
And it's rapidly correcting right now.
Mm-hmm.
The formalization of the rental market is arguably the most potent growth vector for ACE at this very moment.
Okay, walk me through what that actually means on the ground. Like, what does the unorganized rental market look like versus the formal one?
So historically, let's say a mid-sized contractor wins a road project, right?
Okay.
They don't want to buy a crane outright. So they rent one from a local operator in the town who owns maybe 3 or 4 aging machines.
Oh, like a mom and pop crane rental.
Yeah, exactly. And these machines are usually kept running with aftermarket parts, rudimentary maintenance.
Mm.
It's cheap, but it's highly, highly unreliable.
Which is fine if you're just building a small local project, I guess.
Right. But now, factor in modern EPC contracts. These new infrastructure projects, they have incredibly strict completion deadlines. They have stringent safety compliance standards.
Oh, right.
If a local rental crane breaks down and delays a highway project for 3 days, the penalty clauses for the contractor are severe.
So the risk equation has completely flipped for them.
Precisely. Contractors just can no longer afford the unreliability of the unorganized market. And this is driving a 15 to 20% shift toward organized, formal rental
Oh,
fleets.
wow, that's a huge migration.
It is. These are well-capitalized rental companies buying brand new, technologically advanced equipment from OEMs like ACE, ensuring maximum uptime.
And the sources indicate that the demand profile is shifting because of this. 70% of the current demand is classified as highly durable.
Right.
That includes these long-term, multi-year infrastructure commitments we talked about, plus a very steady 25 to 30% replacement demand.
That's right. As the old machines age out.
Yeah, exactly. As the 10 to 15-year-old legacy equipment finally ages out and becomes obsolete under emission and safety norms, so that leaves only about 30% of the market subject to short-term, highly cyclical swings.
Which, fundamentally changes how you model the business.
Yeah.
It provides a much, much higher floor during economic slowdowns.
But, okay, let me challenge that durability narrative for a second.
Second.
Because it all sounds great on paper, right? But aren't we just looking at a government sugar high right now?
A sugar high.
Yeah, I mean, what happens if government capex cools down? If inflation ticks up, interest rates spike, and private housing stalls, doesn't this entire house of cards tumble? Because a crane is a major capital expense. When money gets tight, capital expenses are the very first thing to get slashed.
You're touching on the core vulnerability of the entire sector. I mean, the sensitivity is absolutely real.
Yeah.
Historically, ACE's revenue correlates with India's GDP at a 0.7 to 0.8x elasticity. That means they are highly tethered to the broader economy. If GDP growth slows down, ACE's top line will inevitably take a hit. There's no escaping that.
Right.
But surviving and really thriving in a down cycle in this industry isn't just about passively riding macroeconomic waves. It's about how fiercely you can defend your territory and how effectively you can steal market share when the overall pie shrinks.
Which brings us to the invaders trying to storm the castle, right? Because if you have a $1.2 billion playground with a ton of unorganized territory just up for grabs, you are going to attract serious predators.
Oh, absolutely.
And ACE has a massive target on its back. The domestic competitors alone are heavyweights. You've got Escorts, Kubota, Tata Hitachi, L&T. But the real pressure cooker seems to be the influx of Chinese OEMs. We were talking about companies like XCMG, Sany, and Zoomlion.
Yeah, and you have to understand, the Chinese OEMs operate on an entirely different scale of manufacturing capacity.
Right, and the price difference they offer is just brutal. According to the research in the crawler and truck crane segments, these Chinese imports are routinely coming in 30 to 40% cheaper than domestic alternatives.
Yeah, and when a competitor undercuts you by 40% in a market as historically price-sensitive as India, it forces a complete reevaluation of your business model.
I bet.
You cannot fight a 40% price gap with brand loyalty or, a slightly better warranty. It just doesn't work.
Right. So how is ACE actually defending the moat then? Because they clearly aren't just rolling over. The sources outline a multi-layered defense here.
They do.
First, they have built this extensive pan-India dealer network, currently sitting at over 125 locations. Second, they are leaning entirely into service uptime. Third, because they manufacture indigenously, they boast an 8 to 9x capex to revenue efficiency.
Yep.
And they also have governmental protections helping them out strict BIS compliance standards that act as a barrier to entry alongside targeted anti-dumping duties.
Right. But, those governmental protections, they only buy them time. The operational defense is what actually wins the war.
How so?
Well, the dynamics of customer bargaining power in this space are entirely dictated by the cost of failure.
The cost of failure, okay.
Yeah. ACE is selling to large EPC contractors, right? These firms have legendary procurement departments whose sole job is to squeeze every last ruby out of a vendor.
Oh, I'm sure.
They demand rock-bottom prices.
But there is a catch.
The catch is downtime.
Ah.
If a highly discounted imported crane snaps a hydraulic line on a critical bridge project and the replacement part is sitting in a warehouse in Shenzhen,
Oh, man.
right, the entire multi-million-dollar project just grinds to a halt. The daily cost of idle labor, idle heavy machinery, and project delay penalties is infinitely more expensive than the initial purchase price of the crane.
Right, that makes total sense.
Therefore, ACE has successfully shifted the battleground. They refuse to play the game on upfront price alone. They compete on guaranteed service uptime. That network of 125 locations means a technician and a spare part are never far away.
So I look at it this way, and tell me if this makes sense. Buying a deeply discounted Chinese crane right now is kind of like buying a cheap burner phone.
Okay.
You get a fantastic upfront price, and it does the job on day one, but good luck finding a replacement battery or getting it serviced when the screen inevitably cracks on a remote job site in, say, Madhya Pradesh.
It's a very apt analogy. The total cost of ownership over a 10-year life cycle heavily favors the local incumbent with the dense service network.
Right.
Furthermore, ACE is evolving technologically to ensure they aren't just selling dumb metal.
What are they doing?
They have launched their Ultra Series next-gen cranes. These are equipped with advanced telematics, load moment indicators, and predictive maintenance sensors.
Oh, wow. So it's all digitized.
Yeah, they're giving the EPC contractor real-time data on how the machine is being used, its fuel efficiency, and operator safety. So they're layering software and data onto the hardware to compete on total project value, rather than just the price of the steel.
But let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
China didn't become a global manufacturing powerhouse by just giving up easily.
No, they didn't.
If these Chinese OEMs decide they want the Indian market badly enough, what stops them from just stomaching the financial losses for 5 years? What if they pour billions into building out their own localized service networks, training local technicians and stocking parts in every major Indian city? Does ACE's moat suddenly evaporate?
I mean, it is the single biggest existential threat to ACE's long-term dominance.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the physical reality of building that network.
Yeah.
It requires deep local knowledge, navigating complex state-by-state logistics, acquiring real estate for service centers, and training thousands of specialized mechanics.
Right.
You cannot fast-track that overnight, regardless of how much capital you deploy. And more importantly, ACE's defense isn't just operational. No, their ability to hold the line is heavily subsidized by an internal financial engine that gives them immense flexibility to absorb price wars if necessary.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the financial mechanics we're about to discuss go from just impressive to kind of jaw-dropping for a heavy manufacturing company.
Yeah, they really do.
Let's trace their operating margin trajectory for a second. Their EBITDA margins expanded from roughly 10% in FY21 to 15% by FY25.
Which is solid.
Right. And then in the first quarter of FY26, it peaked at 20.5%.
And, expanding margins to that degree in a capital-intensive business is difficult enough.
Yeah.
But doing it in the current commodity environment is what really stands out here.
Right, because during that exact same period, they faced an 11 to 14% inflation in global steel costs. And steel is the primary ingredient in a crane. Yet they managed to push through aggressive price hikes to offset that raw material spike, and they still expanded their margins to over 20%.
I mean, passing through a double-digit raw material cost increase, maintaining your market share against cheaper imports, and simultaneously expanding your operating margins, that is the absolute textbook definition of pricing power.
Right.
It proves that the customer values the uptime in the network more than they care about the sticker price.
And then you look at the balance sheet, and it is just flawless. They have zero net debt.
Unheard of.
In fact, their net debt is technically negative $3.58 billion. Their gross debt is basically a rounding error at just $1.34 billion, and they are sitting on a cash surplus of $6.37 billion.
Which completely defies the gravity of the heavy equipment sector.
Usually they're drowning in debt, right?
Usually these companies are leveraged to the hilt just to fund their factory expansions and hold their inventory.
Exactly. And their return metrics reflect that really lean structure. ROCE is sitting comfortably between 31.7% and 40.6%. ROE is humming along around 22.9% to 28.6%. And perhaps most surprisingly, they boast a 100% operating cash flow to PAT conversion.
Which is incredible.
They've also ruthlessly optimized their working capital. They brought their cash conversion cycle down to just 18 days.
Down from 26 days back in FY23.
Yeah, exactly.
So the operational reality driving those numbers is intense capacity utilization combined with relentless fixed cost absorption.
Right.
They run their factories incredibly lean, and because they carry virtually zero debt, they aren't bleeding cash to interest payments every month.
Makes sense.
So when they hit a 28.3% revenue CAGR, which they achieved from FY21 to FY25, every single incremental rupee of top-line growth drops cleanly through the income statement, straight to the bottom line.
But I have to stop you on that cash conversion cycle because an 18-day cycle in this industry honestly breaks my brain a little bit.
I know, it's very fast.
Because they rely heavily on government and PSU orders, right? Either directly or through the EPCs who contract with the government.
Yes.
And in the construction industry, the payment chain is notoriously slow. The government delays payment to the main contractor squeezes the subcontractor, and everyone is just fighting for working capital.
That's the typical reality, yes.
So how does a company sitting at the top of that food chain wring their cash out in under 3 weeks when the bureaucracy inevitably drags its feet?
It is an inherent tension in their business model, and you're totally right to question it. The reality is, receivables absolutely do stretch during government policy shifts, election cycles, or when liquidity tightens up in the banking sector.
Okay, so it does happen.
It does.
Yeah.
But this is where that pristine balance sheet acts as a weapon. That $6.37 billion cash hoard is an impenetrable buffer.
So they basically act as their own bank.
In a way, yes. When payments from contractors are delayed, ACE does not have to scramble to the debt markets to take out high-interest, short-term working capital loans just to make payroll or buy steel for the next batch of cranes.
Right.
They just absorb the delay internally. Furthermore, their market dominance gives them leverage. If a contractor wants the machines on time for the next phase of the project, well, they have to settle the accounts.
Oh, pay Tipper, you don't get the crane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this financial fortress doesn't just protect them in down cycles. It's the exact mechanism that allows them to aggressively fund their next big strategic bets without having to dilute their equity or take on crippling debt.
Which perfectly sets up their next frontiers. Because sitting on a cash pile and dominating mobile cranes is great, but they are clearly hunting for new growth vectors.
They absolutely are.
First up is a major push into premiumization. They have entered a joint venture with Kato Works out of Japan. It is a 50-50 partnership specifically aimed at building high-tonnage heavy cranes.
And what's fascinating here is the strategic alignment of this move.
Why Kato specifically, though? Why not just build it themselves? I mean, they know how to build cranes.
Because the high-tonnage segment is entirely different engineering territory. When you're lifting hundreds of tons, the metallurgy, the hydraulic precision, and the safety margins change exponentially.
Oh, I see. It's not just a bigger version of a small crane.
Not at all. And this is the exact segment where ACE has historically lost ground to the cheaper Chinese imports and the premium European brands.
Okay.
By partnering with Kato, they are taking premium Japanese engineering and technology, which is globally respected for precision and safety, and mating it directly with ACE's low-cost Indian manufacturing base.
Ah, so they get the Japanese intellectual property, but they build it with Indian labor and steel costs.
Exactly. And the timing is critical. We are seeing a rapid shift in urban India right now towards complex, multi-story precast construction.
What does that mean, practically, like for someone walking past a site?
So instead of pouring concrete on-site, builders are casting entire walls, floors, and structural columns in off-site factories. Then they truck them to the location and assemble the building like a giant set of building blocks.
Wow, okay.
It is much faster and cleaner. But those precast concrete sections are incredibly heavy. You cannot lift them with a standard mobile crane.
Right.
You need specialized high-tonnage equipment. So this JV is designed to produce a product specifically tailored for that booming precast market, but at a price point that the Indian contractor can actually digest.
Got it. And that's just one frontier. They're also pivoting hard into defense engineering. They recently secured a 420 crore order for specialized rough terrain forklifts for the military.
Yeah, which is a huge deal.
It feels like a massive validation of their core technology, right?
Yeah.
Proving it can meet military specs while simultaneously diversifying them away from purely civilian construction cycles.
Absolutely. Defense contracts provide incredibly sticky revenue. Once you're designed into a military procurement cycle, you tend to stay there for a very long time.
Add to that their export ambitions. They are currently shipping machinery to 37 countries across Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. And their stated goal is to push the combined export and defense revenue to 10% of their total mix.
Right.
And here is the kicker on all of this expansion. According to the data, they are currently operating at only 25 to 30% capacity utilization in some of these newer segments.
The capacity headroom is really the silent growth lever in this story.
How so?
Well, it means they don't need to build massive new factories to double their output in these areas. The fixed costs are already sunk. If they can drive demand in exports or defense, the margins on those incremental sales will be exceptionally high.
But is there a risk of diversification here?
Diversification.
Yeah, I mean, look at the footprint. They are making agricultural tractors. They are building high-rise tower cranes. They are partnering with Japanese engineering firms for heavy lifting. They are manufacturing specialized rough terrain gear for the armed forces. And they are exporting to 37 countries.
A lot.
Are they spreading themselves too thin? It feels a bit like walking into a restaurant and being handed a 40-page menu. Sure, they offer everything from sushi to pizza, but eventually the quality in the kitchen has to slip, doesn't it?
The 40-page menu analogy is very apt. The risk of losing managerial focus is genuine.
Yeah.
Because while these adjacencies all make perfect strategic sense on paper, defense smooths out cycles, exports provide dollar-denominated revenue, heavy cranes attack a weak spot, they introduce significant compounding execution risk.
Exactly.
Manufacturing a tractor for a farmer in Punjab requires a completely different supply chain rhythm, dealer network, and financing structure than assembling a complex Japanese-designed heavy crane for a high-speed rail project.
Worlds apart.
Completely.
Yeah.
And managing that complexity is difficult, which naturally brings us to the darker side of the thesis, the concrete cracks that could threaten the whole structure.
Let's build the bear case then.
Yeah.
Because as pristine as that balance sheet is, the risks they face are highly localized to the specific mechanics of their industry. We talked about the Chinese OEMs earlier, but in the heavy and crawler crane segments, that competition is intensifying rapidly. Fighting a 40% price undercut in a segment where you are still trying to establish your own technology is a brutal headwind.
It is a severe headwind, and unfortunately, it is far from the only one.
Right. Then there is the deep cyclicality of the business itself. We touched on the GDP elasticity of 0.7 to 0.XX. But to put that in perspective for the listener, during the severe economic downturn in 2020, their revenue didn't just dip, it plunged nearly 18% in a very short time frame.
There was a sharp drop.
Combine that macro vulnerability with their input cost volatility. They have heavy exposure to global steel prices, which they obviously do not control, and they rely on imported components like specialized hydraulics and electronics.
And this is where the mechanics of their pricing power get truly tested.
Right, because the research points out a real vulnerability here. Their ability to pass through those raw material cost increases to the customer in real time is limited to about 50%. The rest of the cost recovery lags by 3 to 6 months. And we are already seeing some stagnation in the top line. The trailing 12-month revenue growth has slowed down to roughly 5%. Yeah, definitely a deceleration. Even more concerning, their Q1 FY26 revenue actually declines 7.7% year over year. Management attributed that drop to a heavy monsoon season and a pre-buying effect ahead of emission norm changes, but, a decline is a decline.
If we construct the anatomy of a true bear case for ACE, it looks exactly like this. Imagine a scenario where global steel prices unexpectedly spike 20% due to supply chain shocks.
Okay, bad start.
Right. And at the exact same time, the Indian government, perhaps due to fiscal deficit concerns, initiates a 2-year freeze on new infrastructure spending.
Ouch.
ACE's capacity utilization, which absolutely relies on volume, suddenly drops to 50%.
So the operating leverage just completely reverses.
Exactly. The fixed costs, the factories, the payroll, the R&D, which usually drive their margins upward during a boom, suddenly act as an anchor, eating away at whatever margins are left.
Right.
And because the market has priced ACE's stock at a premium, assuming flawless execution and uninterrupted growth, that valuation multiple just crumbles.
Yeah, that's ugly.
Now, because they have zero debt and a huge cash hoard, bankruptcy isn't on the table. They will survive. But significant, painful shareholder value destruction certainly is.
So they're caught in a vicious raw material trap.
Basically, yes.
On one side, they face volatile global commodity markets that dictate their steel costs. On the other side, they face highly price-sensitive Indian contractors who are constantly being courted by cut-rate Chinese competitors.
The tough spot.
ACE seems to be acting as a financial shock absorber for the entire domestic construction industry. They eat the inflation up front, hold the line on price as long as they can to keep the customer, and just pray they can pass it through 6 months later.
Right.
How long can a company eat those lagging costs before their margins collapse entirely?
That is the ultimate stress test of their entire business model. Managing that margin squeeze, absorbing the inflation, managing the supply chain, and retaining the customer without destroying profitability. It requires exceptional cycle-tested leadership.
It really does.
Navigating these brutal, multi-year industry cycles without eroding the underlying value of the company brings us directly to the people steering the ship and how the broader market is currently evaluating their competence.
Well, let's look at the captains of the ship. The company is led by CEO Saurabh Agarwal, and they are backed by a very substantial 65.42% promoter holding.
Which is key.
Crucially, in an industry where founders often leverage their shares to fund side projects, there are absolutely zero pledged shares here.
Yeah, none.
And their track record on capital allocation over the last few years has been incredibly disciplined. They issued a 100% final dividend, which translates to about $2 per share for FY26. They maintain a strict focus on internal organic capex to grow their capacity. And they have completely avoided the temptation of splashy, value-destroying, debt-fueled acquisitions.
The transparency and discipline of this management team are critical factors in why the market affords them a premium valuation.
Yeah. Oh.
When you dig into their segment reporting, it is notably clear. They meticulously break down the margins, revenues, and capital employed across cranes, material handling, and agri-equipment.
Everything is out in the open.
Exactly. And in the heavy machinery and construction sectors, accounting can often be highly opaque, obscuring where the real money is being made or lost. ACE's clarity builds deep institutional trust.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, that 65% promoter holding aligns them with the long-term reality of the business. They aren't tweaking operations to appease quarterly earnings panic.
Yeah.
They are managing the company to survive and dominate the next 10-year infrastructure cycle.
And the market clearly buys into that long-term narrative, right?
They do.
Because consensus estimates currently expect 14 to 15% revenue growth and 17 to 18% EBITDA margins moving forward. The market is aggressively pricing in a strong FY27 recovery to help them reach management's stated medium-term target of 6,000 to 6,200 crore in revenue by FY29 or FY30.
Yeah, those are big numbers.
But, and this is a big, so what does this all mean for the reality right now? Because the market is baking in a perfect FY27 recovery to hit that 6,000 crore target.
Right.
But if their trailing growth over the last year is only 5% and the most recent quarter just shrank by 7.7%, aren't investors just staring adoringly at the rearview mirror of the FY21 to FY25 boom?
It's a valid question.
Like, are they completely ignoring the traffic jam forming right in front of them?
It is the central debate surrounding the company right now. The market is choosing to take management at its word.
Interesting.
Investors are betting that the current slowdown is entirely a temporary blip, a messy concoction of monsoon delays, election cycle spending pauses, and emission regulation changes, and not a structural shift in the underlying demand.
They are pricing it for absolute perfection.
They are pricing it as a durable, multi-year compounder. But to justify that immense face and to prove that the current traffic jam is just a temporary roadblock, ACE has to flawlessly execute on those new growth vectors we discussed.
Right.
They have to prove they can scale the export business significantly. They have to deliver complex defense orders on time and to spec. And, perhaps most importantly, they absolutely must make the Kato joint venture a commercial success to finally blunt the Chinese advantage in the heavy crane segment.
Wow. We have covered a colossal amount of ground today. ACE is undeniably an industrial powerhouse.
Without a doubt.
They have built a fortress balance sheet in a sector known for debt traps. They absolutely dominate the Indian mobile crane market, and they are uniquely positioned to capitalize on a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure pipeline.
Yes.
But they are operating in a brutal neighborhood, facing genuine existential threats from global pricing wars, raw material traps, and unyielding macroeconomic cycles.
They are the physical manifestation of India's growth ambitions. They carry both the immense world-building potential and the inherent, deeply cyclical vulnerabilities of that entire national build-out.
Which brings me to a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive. We have spent this entire time talking about hardware. We've talked about bending steel, hydraulic systems, heavy lifting, and raw physical industrial capacity. But I want you to consider the Telematics ACE is integrating into their new Ultra Series cranes.
Oh, right.
As India continues to formalize its vast rental market, what happens when these thousands of cranes operating across every major infrastructure project in the country aren't just dumb machines?
Right.
What happens when they act as intelligent, interconnected data nodes? The real future moat for a company like ACE might not be the metal they forge, but the data they harvest about exactly how, when, and where India is being built.
That's a massive shift.
Who owns that data, and how will it ultimately reshape the entire construction industry? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you look at a skyline, remember the unseen machines and the invisible data making it all possible.